David, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to me. Can you begin by giving us a brief overview of CarbonCloud and what you do and your role in the food and drinks business?
All right. Thank you, and thank you for having me on. And Carbon Cloud, we are a SaaS company, so web-based software platform that help the food and beverage industry work with their climate emissions to help them get access to really good quality data for food and beverage, essentially. And we focus very strongly on the anything supply chain related, which means then what's often referenced to as Scope 3 emissions and Scope 3 data, and also talked about as product carbon footprints. So this depends on if you're buying it, it's the Scope 3, and if you're selling it, it's the product carbon footprint. As some historical context, we've been around for almost 6 years now. We're headquartered in Sweden, Gothenburg, Sweden, and we operate internationally with the main focus on Europe. Our software caters for all the steps of the value chain, which means from farm level to production, all the way up to retail. I mean, some of the food brands are rather small, some of them are very large indeed, and the wholesale retail side of things is larger companies. If we take a step back, maybe to the problem we're aiming to solve, and even like why I founded this company, and it has to do with like the background to the food and beverage industry is that our governments have decided that we're going to solve climate change. We want to get the emissions down. Most industries have come fairly far on the action pathway towards reducing emissions. The food and beverage industry is behind most other verticals. And this mostly has to do with a lack of access to good data. Because for food and beverage, for the most part, for most companies, the majority of emissions don't occur within your own organization, but they happen upstream by your supplier or your supplier's supplier or your supplier's supplier's supplier. I mean, these value chains can be long and they can span continents and they can be very, very complex. And for you to be able to come up with a plan for how to halve your emissions or get down 90% and whatever you want to do long term to say 2030, which isn't very long term anymore, but 2050 ultimately, you need to have a way of getting access to high quality data from a whole range of different suppliers. You want to be able to track that over time, and you want to be able to have data where you can talk concrete data reductions with customers and suppliers and like negotiate contracts essentially saying, yes, I can deliver this to you over these 5 years, and yes, I will reduce emissions by so and so much. You want to have that conversation. And to be able to do that, you need to have a similar conversation with your suppliers and agreeing on data-driven reduction plans and then locking them in and then signing procurement contracts. And then having internally whatever changes you need to happen during that time frame, right? And where we come in is that we have this network structured system or platform where we can provide, starting off, high quality so-called secondary data. So just say, all right, so you buy cacao from Ecuador, you buy bananas from here, you buy boxed wine from there, whatever the type of item. We have high quality secondary data, which means we don't engage your supplier at the first stage. We have good proxy data for most things food and beverage with high granularity. But then we can also enable invitations so that the actual supplier takes ownership of the calculation and improve the quality of it. And they can invite their suppliers. And when this happens, there is this collaboration of data that's taking place where you can know that your hundreds of suppliers or thousands of suppliers are measured exactly the same way. You can also know precisely the quality of the data that you have, and you can see how they change, right? And so our role here is to become that, you can say, I don't know, facilitator of the conversation of strategy. The companies decide their own strategy, of course. Do they want to be in the forefront? Do they want to be just behind? Whatever, like compared to competitors and market. They decide. But we can provide the data layer that enables them to have this data-driven approach and data-driven conversation with suppliers and customers.
Okay, and just to drill into that a little bit, you talked about potentially hundreds of suppliers, and everyone takes control of their data, and in some cases they can actually work on improving that data
Mm.
set, etc. How do you ensure the accuracy, the completeness, you know, given that there's variability and gaps in supply chain emissions? How do you actually sort of verify it, if you know?
Yeah. So that's the million dollar question, right? And there is this, the general problem is figuring out what are the emissions actually. So if you go to the standard approach or the what they were doing if they aren't working with us essentially, or like most of them are used to, is you have proxy data. You go to, like, you find a database, or you find someone helping you through a database with emission proxies for, grapes from France or whatever it is, and like different items, but they don't represent your supplier specifically. That's what's mostly being used for getting the picture. And then if you want to get better data, you might email your supplier and they send you a PDF, or they send you a spreadsheet, or they send you an email with some results of their own calculation, where either they got external help with or they did in-house. And then if you have multiple different suppliers, it's presented in different ways, and you have no idea if the quality is consistent between the calculation. You have no idea what the assumptions are they're going, or how much of the calculation that actually based on their own real data versus other secondary data sources. Very hard to tell, right? That's the first layer of the problem. And our solution to that is that we provide the calculator that is used here. So say you have your purchase good, well, then the secondary data is all provided by a consistent model, right? And then when you invite, you can be certain that the same calculation model is being used again. So the invited supplier, they never provide any already calculated footprint, but rather production parameters such as ingredient lists, like bills of material and energy going in and packaging types and where they source from, who they source from, and so on. And that data is being used to run the same exact calculation model as the secondary data was using, or your competitors are using, but based on your data. And by doing this, we can guarantee methodological consistency. And then our system does some reasonability checks on the data, and we can also go in and plausibility check the data to see, like, random samples, or even check all if required, to see, does the data make sense?
If we take the drinks industry as an example, uh, is there a sort of hardest to reach emission hotspot that you've encountered where that is a good example of how, challenges can occur?
So the drink industry, I think is really interesting, because now we're working with some really, sorry, front-leaning actors who really want to solve this problem. And it's, the industry is kind of continent wide, but it's also communicating. So I think we're in a good position moving towards having this very standardized protocol for calculating and data sharing, which I think is really, really great for eventually getting everyone to spend way less resources and speak the same language, right? The main things or hurdles you could say that we come up against are, the main one has to do with data security and sensitive data, which is because to be able to perform these calculations, we need access to, who the suppliers are, and the recipes, where things are produced, and the recipes for them, which is for a lot of companies like the most sensitive, trade secrets they have, right? So we, of course, anticipating this or knowing this, we have built a system so that the data you put into your own account doesn't leave that account. So if someone gets invited, they provide their sensitive data into the account. They retain full and complete ownership of that data. We get a license to calculate based on the data, but not for sharing it onwards. And then there is a standardized report of results that is being shared. So the downstream customer can see the footprints calculated, and they can see the quality, the amount of primary data in the calculation, but they can't see the sensitive trade secret data.
All right. And I noticed that you don't integrate carbon offsetting in your whole methodology. How do you advise clients on dealing with unavoidable emissions beyond sort of measurement and reduction?
Yeah, so generally our approach is, we don't want to give credit for things that are too uncertain. The worst risk or the worst advice I could give as a founder to a customer of ours would be place your bet on climate strategy on something that turns out to not work and they lost 4 years. That might be extremely expensive to them down the road. And then there is unfortunately, there aren't any silver bullets here. Getting to 2050, getting the emissions down will be expensive. There will be a lot of money spent on investments in machinery, replacing things. There will be finding collaborations with suppliers, sometimes finding new suppliers because your current ones aren't up to the bar for your decarbonization targets and so on. A lot of money will be spent there. And like the quick fix that you want to pay something and the problem goes away, unfortunately, it doesn't exist. But the most expensive part that might happen to them is if you miss the market. So if you wait and don't do anything, and it turns out that you lose contracts, your customers go elsewhere because you aren't delivering to their performance. So you become a risk, a liability in their own climate strategy, and you lose contracts. That will be by far the most expensive thing, right?
And just to end on, really, I mean, we've covered a lot of areas, but as you look forward now in the short term, let's say over the course of the next year or two, what are the big challenges you see on the horizon that are sort of, flagging up with this field?
Companies to really internalize the fact that the markets and the policy environments are changing, that they will be forced to come up with these decarbonization plans, true decarbonization plans, and also collaboration on data with suppliers across borders and so on. And then seeing that as an opportunity. Because there is people will still want food in the future. People will want wine and beer and all those things also in 2050, 2060. Rest assured, there will be a market. The question is only how do you make sure that you become on the supply chain of this market? And how do you plan for this? And it needs to be a bit of a cultural shift in the market, in the whole sector towards, yes, this is the way it is now. There are you will still need to have a beautifully tasting wine or people won't buy it, for sure. Quality, taste is king. You never get around that. But then there are other factors that you need to take into consideration, boundary conditions. And this climate thing is becoming a boundary condition that you need to take care of and work with your suppliers with. And we are seeing that now, changes towards the constructive leaning into this, right? But not everybody yet, right? But the next 2 years will be about getting the entire business, the entire industry leaning into this and seeing, all right, how can I, as an individual in my company, and how can our company benefit from this transition?
Okay, well, look, David, thank you very much for taking the time. It's been quite a comprehensive overview, and I hope we are still drinking wine in 2060 and
Yeah,
2070.
I
So,
couldn't agree more.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.